I think that I think moving to a popular vote system is not without peril, it's not without problems. It's not a simple, one choice is all good, the other is all bad. It's a balancing act, but I think the balance has shifted, in my mind at least, and I think that we should go to a popular vote. I think it would stimulate public participation in the democratic process like nothing else we could possibly do.
Welcome to episode 24 of the Left Shew Politics podcast. I'm your host today, Rick Shew. Neither co-host of mine, Jeremy or Michael, is on this episode. In fact, this is actually just going to be a one-on-one chat with me and my special guest, the amazing and the brilliant Chris Clow. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing okay, man. Thank you for the invitation. It's much appreciated. We got an interesting topic, I think.
We do. Absolutely we do. Now, this is your third show?
Yes.
We've done third or fourth show, and we've done a lot of comic book-centric podcasts, but as far as this political little thing here we do, this is your third or fourth show with Left Shew Politics. Do me a favor, as opposed to, since we're personal friends, as opposed to me giving this formal introduction, tell the group a little bit about yourself, your history of why you're interested in being a guest on a political podcast.
Oh, well, I spent my entire college career studying politics, and I have an active interest to actually go into office at some point someday, or at least run for it. But beyond that, I volunteered with local campaigns for a number of years when I was living in Washington State, and politics is everything. That's the thing. It's something that I think a lot of people fail to understand, or at least maybe they just prefer not to understand it, is that the way in which we interact with the political system, it's an everyday occurrence. It's not just when you go into a voting booth or when you're mailed a ballot. Politics affects the way that you live your life. It affects how much money you bring home. It affects even stopping at a stop sign when you're driving down the street. It is an intrinsic part of the American lifestyle, and those that actively participate in it, they know that they will have more of a voice in the affairs of the way that they conduct their lives. And that's why I'm always an enormous advocate for more participation in the process. But there are always interesting conversations and discussions to be had about what are each of our ideas for moving society forward. And they're necessary conversations to have. Even if they're not always the most pleasant conversations to have, they are always necessary. And that's why I studied politics for years, both domestic politics and international politics when I was in college. It's why I was an opposition researcher for a couple of local campaigns, and why I enjoyed knocking on doors and talking to people about the issues that were important to them.
And that's what I love about you, man, is that, look, most people I know these days at least vote. One good thing, one of very few good things that have come about in this world of 24/7 cable news that we live in, is that at least people got a little bit more interested in politics. Now, for the wrong reasons, and it's tribalism, and it's political football, and it's name-calling. I don't like that part of it. I'm not necessarily saying I'm innocent in that. I certainly sometimes contribute to the negative aspects of politics because I'm a passionate person, and sometimes I just get pissed off, and things happen. But
you're human.
Yeah. But and you have better self-control than I do. And when I break down this Left Shew thing, for those of you that may just be listening, is three people. My namesake is just a play on words. Left Shew, haha, Rick Shew. But Michael Malloy and Jeremy Grolke are two are the other parts of this, and we are one of three parts, or I am one of three parts, and we're equal. And even being liberal guys, we have different voices, and some of us are a little bit more liberal than the others. Some of us are a little bit more red meat, have a little bit more ferociousness to us, and others a little bit more even kill, like Chris is. But at the end of the day, what I love about what Chris is saying is that no matter what your personality type is realizing is when people say, like, I just don't like politics, I don't like thinking about it. Well, and I understand not wanting to think about what Sean Hannity's monologue was last night, or maybe even what Rachel Maddow is talking about in real time right now. But it's about everything Chris just said. It's your life. It's everything. It's everything around you, all the way down to a stop sign. It is absolutely factually accurate. So thank you for that. That's a crazy cool way to phrase it, because I wish more people, including myself, thought like you did.
Well, it's my pleasure to be a part of it. But hey, I mean, I got a temper too. Don't worry. You haven't seen me flare up at like a town hall or something. So
no, I'm looking forward to it. We missed each other in Chicago a couple years ago. We still haven't met in person. But like with me and Michael and Jeremy is it's interesting because he's a little bit more of an academic than Malloy and I are, and then he's more cerebral, right? And Malloy's a little bit more analytical, and I'm just a little bit more of the passion personality. But all three of us do what you do in the sense of we're involved. We knock on doors, we campaign, we go to wherever we need to go. If it's a protest or whatever, like we're somewhere. And that's great. But everybody has to do that, right? Just at the end of the day, register to vote, be a voter, and just please educate yourself on your candidates, policies, etc.
Yes.
And like what you just said, Chris, in terms of like stop signs, what I think that represents is that we get wrapped up sometimes in this this global, if you will, political world that we live in. But things are so in your backyard. What's happening in your town is almost as important, if in some cases more important, than what's happening on Capitol Hill. So,
absolutely,
for sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you haven't ever really interacted with local politics before, like you said, I mean, it gets so easy to get bogged down in the conversations that are happening at the national level. But if you value moderation in political discussion, the best place to find it is by actively participating in local politics. Because even if your neighbor across the street might be a part of a different political party, or, you guys feel completely differently about hot button issues like abortion or the death penalty or whatever it might be, or immigration, you probably still have kind of similar ideas, because when you both look out the window, you see the same yard, you see the same street, you see the same stop signs. And if you have sort of a shared perspective on what you want your local community to look like, what you want your neighborhood to look like, best way is to get involved at the local level.
On that note, we're going to transition to something that's certainly not on the local level, but that's so well said. Thanks. Okay, so there's no good segue here because I could just hear you talking about local politics all day long, but we do have a topic to get to, and it's a big one. And that's why I wanted this show to be a one-on-one show, is because I really just want to peel back this onion on this topic, and this is the Electoral College, okay? And I'll just say up front, I think it should be abolished, and I'm not saying that because I don't like the outcome of 2016, although I don't, but I've been saying this for 20 years. In fact, I'll say this right now. If I could have my way, it goes away tomorrow, but I'll allow it for one more election in 2020. That way I don't look just like a bitter anti-Trump guy, and then by 2024 we roll out the popular vote. So a little history here on Electoral College. Okay, so Constitutional Convention of 1787, the 12th Amendment rolled out Electoral College. All right, it was meant to be a balance, election power like on the federal and state level, and mainly because, and this is a loaded thing that we'll explore more, but our founding fathers were very nervous about calling us a direct democracy. All right, so I will also say that I think the Electoral College is racist as fuck. Kidding. No, not really, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm jumping ahead of myself. But I will say this. In all seriousness, and there is some racial issues with the Electoral College that we will talk about. But so I was kidding and not kidding. But I'll say this. I want every vote to count. Every single vote. If you are a liberal and you live in Alabama, if you're a conservative and you live in California, your vote should count. Just like it does when you vote for a mayor, a Dallas City Council person, a governor. For your president, your vote should count. And if you're a liberal in Alabama, it does not count. If you're a conservative in California, it does not count. And when I say I want it to count, I'm not talking about in this sort of like big picture symbolic fashion, right? Like, eventually we'll get there and I'm going to contribute to that process. No, I want your vote to count now. Okay. And before I ask Chris if he agrees with me or not, I just want to also say that, again, I have felt this way for 20 years. This is not about Trump. One more time. It begins in 2024. If I could if I rolled the universe. All right, so there's my little rant just to start off and let you guys know where I'm coming from. Chris, just a loaded question out of the gate. Should we abolish the Electoral College?
Oh, man. I knew that you were going to ask me the direct question, and my honest perspective is that I'm of two minds about it. I feel like I have a decent enough understanding of what the pros and cons are of the Electoral College. There have been 5 people in history who have won the presidency without winning the popular vote. 3 of them were all in the 1800s, relatively close together, and then you jump 112 years ahead, and that's when George W. Bush won it, and then only 16 years after that, it happened again at the most recent presidential election. The Electoral College, when you look at it at, I guess at a macro level, it does have a lot of things that seem to be working against it. There's a lot of fair criticisms to have about the Electoral College. It has an exclusive, well, I guess not exclusive, but candidates who are running for president spend an inordinate amount of time in just a few swing states that are mathematically important to try and clinch. Ohio always comes up. Florida always comes up as 2 of the primary battleground states. And candidates spend a lot more time there than they probably would in another situation. People who feel disenfranchised by the Electoral College might not even just turn out at all to vote. And that's something that really gets to me about a disadvantage of the Electoral College, because if there's anything that I'm extraordinarily passionate about, it is participation. And if there is something that is at a systemic level that is suppressing participation, then that's not a good thing.
So do you think, on that note, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's an important point. I want to just talk about that for just a second.
Sure.
So what you're saying is the aforementioned liberal in Alabama or conservative in California, there might be a lot of those individuals who just say the hell with it, and they just don't even go vote because why bother?
Yeah, they'll throw up their hands and they'll just say, well, what's the point if my vote really doesn't count? If I'm not represented in the process, then what do I actually get out of going and casting a ballot? And of course, the thing that I'll tell them is, well, do you care about what happens in your backyard? Because there's more than just the president on the ballot, but that's neither here nor there.
Sure.
But
that's just an important point that I wanted to make sure that was clear. So
yes.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Another really serious problem that I personally have with the Electoral College is that United States territories are not enfranchised. Places like the Mariana Islands, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, which I firmly believe should be the 51st state, they don't get electors in presidential elections. Only states, and that's in the Constitution, only states in the District of Columbia get electors. And disenfranchisement is antithetical to the American experience. Those people are Americans, even if they don't live in fully fledged states. Either they should become fully fledged states, or you should extend electors to United States territories. Even if, there are probably some people that say, well, it's not going to be mathematically significant. So what? Give them electors. Make them feel like they have a stake in it.
Well, or you abolish the Electoral College and you don't have to worry about electors. Okay. Sorry, just wanted to had to get that in there.
That's okay. I mean, but another thing too. I mean, that works as a criticism of the Electoral College is that there is an inherent advantage for a state based on its population, because the amount of electors it gets is directly related to the representation that it has in both houses of Congress. So more populous states get more electoral votes. Now, for that California conservative, that's still probably not enough for them to turn out and vote for it. But for people who have direct criticisms of the Electoral College, that old aspect that goes back to the beginning of American democracy of tyranny of the majority comes into play, and it's an all or nothing system. So states have direct advantages based on their populations, but then there's also that, that lack of representation for less prominent ideological stances or political party stances in certain states.
But is it fair to say that the power of the Electoral College really isn't in the small states? Like, it's in the swing states. and we have anywhere from 9 to 11 states that basically consume all presidential stops, all the advertising, and probably, I don't know, 80 to 90% of the party nominating conventions over the last decade or more, and most of those are quote unquote large states. Now, you might say, well, you don't have to worry about voters in LA or San Francisco or, upstate or New York City deciding who's our next president. But at the same time, we're consumed with, well, why is it okay that Miami gets to do that? So no one's ever explained to me why that's any better. That's part of my
Well, that actually feeds into another criticism that people have. Now, granted, I'll get into it in a minute, but this is not a criticism that I share, that the Electoral College has an inherent disadvantage for less established political parties, i.e. third parties. The winner-take-all aspect of the way that electors are chosen ultimately when they cast their deciding votes basically doesn't really allow for third parties, except in a few rare instances, to actually make it through as a chosen elector.
Now, and Chris, real fast, for people that are listening that may not have educated themselves on this topic, we're talking about this pretty loosely. When you're talking about electors per state, would you mind giving our listeners just a brief summary of what that means specifically?
Yeah, so the number of electoral votes corresponds to a specific person or set of people that is chosen by the states themselves. And I don't think that there's a uniform way that the states actually choose their electors. I think it's actually dependent upon the territory. But what happens is election day takes place. Whomever wins a state, all of the electors that are vowed for that state will cast their ballot for whomever fully won their state.
Right.
So, and then it's those people that ultimately go to the Electoral College and cast the votes to decide who will become the next president. And then that vote is certified in Congress. And once it's certified in Congress, then Inauguration Day is clear to take place.
And all states, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, I believe, follow that protocol. Correct? Is that correct?
I believe so. It's honestly not something that I've looked into a whole lot in the intervening years, but that does jive with what my understanding is.
Yeah. So okay, let's look at the last election, just on this topic right here. Trump won Pennsylvania and Florida, and I actually got this from Time Magazine. This little stat here. But Trump won Pennsylvania and Florida by a combined margin of about 200,000 votes to earn 49 electoral votes. That's once again, in Pennsylvania and Florida, 49 electoral votes. Clinton won Massachusetts by almost 1 million votes, but only earned 11 electoral votes. That's not right. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to kind of frame that real fast. So.
And you can also get into a whole that could honestly open up a whole can of worms when it comes to faithless electors who decide to sort of go against the ultimate results of their states. But really,
really, is there even such thing anymore as faithful electors? I mean,
well, I'm pretty sure that there were at least a couple in 2016, but I'd have to double check that.
Okay, no, and I don't know. I was just throwing that out there, but
no, understandable. So. Yeah. On its face, there are a lot of valid criticism against the existence of the Electoral College. But then, what could possibly advocate for it? What could the Electoral College possibly have in its favor if it's not a direct democratic system, if it disenfranchises third parties in the territories, and might discourage turnout and has a focus on swing states? Well, you get into a whole other set of circumstances that I don't think have really come up a whole lot in the conversation over the last couple of years. The biggest, I think, well, biggest is an operative term, but one of the bigger benefits of the Electoral College is that it prevents a centralized focus on population centers. It prevents urban centrism, if you want to call it. Candidates and parties are required to push their messages out beyond just major population centers like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. and those major cities. So there is a slight bent towards more enfranchisement for maybe not rural areas, but at least suburban areas in the candidates to try and put their message out to a different set of the population. Because if the Electoral College didn't exist, you could very easily say, well, all they're doing is campaigning in LA or in Chicago or in Seattle and not going to any smaller towns as a result of that.
Well, two things on that. First of all, I think there's some small states that make up a slightly larger percentage of electoral votes than they would in a on the national level, but I would think it's a pretty small effect. And I don't know what it is. Let's call it 5, 6, 7% of the population, and the small states control 10% of the electors. And I would guess that math is probably relatively accurate. I think that could be overruled by a majority. I think that's one thing. Secondly, this notion of like this rural areas and they're not represented. Come on, man. Let's be real here. And I'm not saying you're not real. Just I'm speaking in general to like people listening, not you.
I understand.
But even when they're going to Ohio or Iowa, they're not going to some rural area. They're going to the closest major city in that state. And that's where they're campaigning, still in a major city. It might be in a state that has more rural areas than others, but they're still going to that city. So I don't really know if the whole thing with the rural America will be left out is relevant just because someone's in Des Moines, Idaho, or
that leads into something else that is seen, I think, by differing sets of people as an advantage and a disadvantage of the Electoral College, in that there is more weight for a vote in a rural area if it's a mathematically significant state than the opposite. And some people see that as a positive thing, and other people see that as a negative thing. But also, too, something that's in the column of pluses for the Electoral College, because the electors are chosen by the states themselves, and because it's the states that largely determine the ways in which people vote, the Electoral College helps move us away from a singular swath of a centralized government. And one of the other things that kind of pushes into that is that if there is ever an instance of, let's say, election fraud, this most recent midterm, I think, was really illustrative of the fact that it's difficult to manage an election gone wrong, even at the state level. Now, imagine if there was a problem with a popularly elected president of the United States, where then you would have to organize potentially a national recount, potentially vote by vote. It would be a monumental task that the government certainly they've never been prepared to even try anything like that, but it would be a nightmare to actually try and hold the entire electorate accountable and the system accountable if it was not split up into individualized territories.
But why would it matter? Okay, for instance, that's how we elect governors by the popular vote, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So every state just controls their own votes, and then they submit them to, whatever party would oversee this. It would still come from the states, and so the individual states would still be responsible for their count. And so, like, if there's an issue, maybe Texas or somebody else would have to perhaps have that recount. I guess what I'm trying to get out here is I'm confused on if the states handled their votes collectively and submitted, and they were counted per state and then added up. I'm confused on why that would be an issue.
Well, because there are less barriers to the way that votes are divided. When it's all sort of homogenized into because at the end of the day, it is still a popular vote.
But per state, though.
Per state, so you would have, let's say, 50 individualized barriers, but it's all of that stuff still funnels into a singular popular vote, and it would just come down to raw numbers. And that would still be a nightmare from an organizational perspective to actually try and engineer some kind of recount if something were to go wrong.
But if it went wrong, could you not pinpoint the state it went wrong in?
It's hard to tell just because this is not a system that we have had.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
That's the thing. I mean, I'm not saying that it would necessarily totally turn out that way, But because the full vote is less chopped up, let's say, then you just have this big homogenized blob that could potentially have one problem derail the entire thing.
Sure.
So that's just a possibility.
And it's not perfect. Like, I want to say that too. I'm not suggesting, and I'm going to close the show, and in fact, it was our cold opening too, a quote from Al Gore, and it perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about right now. It's not, I'm not just implying that, let's just do it, be easy peasy Japanesey and no big deal. Yeah, there's going to be some barriers, and there's probably going to be some things that I just think the overriding theme for me personally, again, and I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, I want that liberal in Alabama to get off the couch and go vote because he or she knows their vote matters. I want that conservative in California get off the couch because their vote matters. And also, I want us, we're supposed to be the United States of America. We are anything but. We are red and blue states, more so than we've ever been. It's so divided. And maybe also we got away from that a little bit. This might help some national healing, is to quit looking at everything as states. Whereas, because we're electing the president. Like, it's not my business. You live in Illinois, I live in Texas. You're in Chicago, I'm in Dallas. We're in two major cities. But really, Chris, at the end of the day, it's not really our business who Vermont or who West Virginia elects as their governor. It's their business, and I want it to keep it that way. But who we elect as a president is all of our business, and I want that to be a much more coast-to-coast, unanimous, well, not unanimous, not the right word, but a coast-to-coast voice of the whole country speaking, and that's not what we have right now.
Well, here's another thing, though, and I know that I said it was a disadvantage, or at least some people frame it as a disadvantage, that third parties are not, I don't think suppressed is the right word, but they don't have a whole lot of weight in presidential elections.
Not unless they just want to swing an election, which is what Howard Schultz will do if he gets in, or what Ross Perot did in 1992. Right? So
yeah.
I would like you to explore that a little more, because I haven't really given that much thought. And for people that are advocating for a true third party, I think that's only possible with some campaign finance reform, and abolishing the EC.
Here's the thing, though. The Electoral College, it does prop up the two-party system.
Yes.
I think that's a good thing, and here's why. So third parties are at an inherent disadvantage with the Electoral College system when it comes to presidential elections specifically. But that could be seen as an advantage in and of itself by enforcing the two-party system, maintaining the power between the two political parties. One of the perhaps unintended effects of that is that it can act as a kind of, let's say, ideological or political insulation. So theoretically, it could work against these sort of hard swings that could be taking place in the minds of the electorate. It takes a long time, sometimes decades, sometimes a century, for American political parties to be pushed hard ideologically one way or another. Keeping the two-party system in place through the Electoral College system ensures that hard swings won't happen nearly as easily as they potentially could if there were a swath of political parties all over the place. And you could make arguments by looking at other countries, like UKIP in the UK, the UK Independence Party, used to be this rather small and easily looked over collection of pretty hardcore ideologues, pretty hardcore far right-wing nationalist ideologues. And now, not only did they manage to put Britain in a hell of a situation with the really impending, I think, no-deal Brexit that's going to come up, but they have a presence on the national stage over there that they didn't have 25, 30 years ago. And if they had a system like the Electoral College, and obviously the UKIP is nowhere near becoming prime minister or having enough seats in the UK's parliament to get anywhere near that. But a system like ours potentially could have kept them relatively isolated on the ideological stage, the same way that the American Nazi Party is isolated in the United States as like a functional political party. But also, too, the reason, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a rant here, and I apologize for that, but the reason that I get so pissed off when talking about people who choose to throw their weight behind a third party for president, the people who run in third parties for president have a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that American politics works. And we talked about it at the beginning of the show. Politics starts locally. You can't all of a sudden say, I just started a party and I'm going to run for president, and expect to totally change the political landscape of the United States from the top down. It has to happen from the bottom up. You have to start running for city council, for county council, for goddamn dog catcher. If you actually want to create a coalition to have any political weight. It's something that will take decades, but if they don't actually put in the weight to do it, all you are doing is reinforcing the existence of the two-party system that you third-party people profess to hate. You have to start from the bottom, and none of these people ever do, and you always get these third-party presidential candidates who, even in a year like 2016, where they might have had more of a shot because of the historic levels of unpopularity between the two major party candidates, they still couldn't break through because they don't understand how the system works.
I just love what you just said. I don't even know how to respond to that. I'm like a giddy fanboy right now on that rant. I'm speechless. You're absolutely correct. And if we want a true environment where we have a true viable third party, this is not the way to go about it. The people of the Howard Schultz of the world, the Ross Perot's of the world, the Jill Steins of the world, the Jerry Johnsons, Naders of the world, etc. Here. All right. I want to shift gears here a little bit.
Sure.
I have friends that say to me, they agree that we need to abolish the Electoral College. But they'll say, you know, Rick, I'll say this. It served its purpose at one point in time. Now it's obsolete with technology and the internet, etc., just how we live today. We don't need it. People aren't disenfranchised, etc. Okay, fine. I think I've said that before. I think I've just kind of been programmed to say that. Like, I think I've said that and not meant it. Like, I don't like the Electoral College. I want to get rid of it. But, you know, it served its purpose. It was good for a long time. And I'm like, but I'm going, but was it? Is it? And when you look at, there are some prominent constitutional scholars that will say that the EC is like a vestige of slavery. It is deep seated in racism, and I want to get your thoughts on that. And to frame it a little bit, doing some research on this, James Madison said some pretty vile things when talking about the Electoral College, and essentially saying that, you know, Negroes in the South, they present difficulty, and it's like it wasn't small states that pushed for the EC. It was like the large southern states that were more. They feared that the popular vote would allow states to abolish slavery. And look, I don't want to play the race card on everything here, but is there? What are your thoughts on this? Is this, at the end of the day, when you really peel back that onion, like I said at the top of the show, is the EC, is slavery a big component to why this exists in the first place?
It might have been at one point, honestly, but really, I think the best sort of inoculation to something like that, and, you know, we see this in southern states all of the time, is that there are still active methodologies for entrenched people in power in frankly, in the former states of the Confederacy, to try and disenfranchise minority people from voting, people of color from voting. And that is a serious problem.
Still is today.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's not a problem of the past. We're living it every day. This is not some relic left over from the Civil War or from before the Civil War. This is something that, I mean, and I know people who try and advocate this idea that racism is somehow conquered, and it was conquered when we elected an African-American man to be the first black president. But those people just don't understand because they are not talking to people who live that kind of experience.
And what I would also say to them, yeah, we did. And the backlash to that was now we have a racist in the White House who his entire political career is predicated on birtherism of the aforementioned African-American president. That's who he is. That's how he started his whole political existence was calling Obama the Manchurian candidate because he was born in Kenya and he was not even an American citizen. So yeah, we did elect the first black president. Thank God we did, and he served 2 honorable terms. But now we have Donald Trump as a person who is the 45th president. So I always reject that notion and say, yeah, you're right, we did. And then we turned around and elected Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is who we are, and Obama's who we want to be. Mm-hmm. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but I mean, all of that I think is accurate. And it's
I know you were just making a side point. I didn't mean to hijack.
No. You didn't hijack it.
If we elected Hillary or Bernie or whoever, that wouldn't bother me as much as it does, even though it's still ridiculous to suggest that all of a sudden, presto, no more racism because we have a black president. But especially since we turned around and elected Trump.
Well, and I mean, I saw that report the other day that came out of the Southern Poverty Law Center that said that hate groups have risen 30% in as many years.
Yes.
A third? That is an insane figure because there are a swath of people out there that think this kind of behavior is permissible in today's society. We have moved on from a time where racists and white nationalists and white supremacists were, relegated to bingo halls if they all wanted to get together, and even then they were speaking whispered tone, like "Hail Hydra." They were all in whispered tones out there. But now they're out in the open, and you have people like Richard Spencer who speak at meetings where people actively throw up the Nazi salute. That's just one of the terrible, terrible realities that we have to face. And
but Chris, they're just very fine people. Okay, you and I could do a whole show on Trump's racism. So I'm gonna as the host here, I'm gonna bring this back around the Electoral College.
Yeah.
We'll get off tangent.
True.
It would be a significant one, but
the question that you asked,
let's do a Star Wars thing here. Stay on target. Stay on target.
You asked if the Electoral College reinforces that kind of systemic racism, and I don't know the full answer to that question, but I know enough to say that it's possible. But really, it all comes back down to active participation. Mm-hmm. And the problem that often befalls people who choose not to participate, it's usually because they don't have ready access to information. They don't know how easy it is, at least in most cases, to try and go and register to vote, at least if you live in a state where they've actively tried to make it easier. But enfranchisement really is the answer. More participation is the answer. And when you turn on the TV and you see leaders of one primary leader of a major political party say that making election day a national holiday so that people could get it off of work and actually go to vote, when someone says that's a power grab by the opposing party,
Mitch McConnell,
something's wrong. That's
Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. I'm sorry. Did I say something?
That's what he said.
That's what he said.
And that's a serious problem. If at the end of the day, the best time or the best barometer for whether or not your message is working, or at least the best barometer should be, how many votes you can get. If you're worried that having more people vote is going to hurt your chances in an election, then you're not doing a very good job of making your case to people.
No, you're not. And I live in Texas, obviously. And I've lived in 3 states. I've lived in California, and I was in the Los Angeles area. I lived in Oklahoma, actually. That's the restaurant business took me there back and forth. Oklahoma City. And but I am a Dallas kid through and through. So this is my home. It's where I grew up, and I'm living 20 miles north of Dallas now in a suburb and raising my family here. Texas is an interesting state because we are seeing a shift here, and Beto O'Rourke certainly reinforced that shift. But regardless, other than Jimmy Carter beating Gerald Ford here in like 1970, 76, and then Ann Richards serving the great Ann Richards serving her one term as governor. This has been a deep red state, and it goes back to some of the things I talked about at the beginning of this, where we talk swing states. Well, I live in Texas. I wanted Hillary Clinton to come campaign here. I wanted Obama to come campaign here, to give Bernie Sanders credit, who I have many issues with, but I'll give credit where credit is due with Bernie. In 2015, during the primaries, he came to Dallas. He was in Austin. He was in Houston, and I admire the hell out of him for that. And I don't want any certain state to have more emphasis than the other. And that's what we have right now. And I don't think that if we were to abolish this, all of a sudden everybody would just be in California. I think that I think that is so minuscule and short-sighted. Okay, so a lot of this philosophy of the Electoral College is predicated on the fact that there's always this ongoing debate, Chris. Are we a democracy or are we a republic, right? And I mean, if you look at how the founding fathers framed this, the word democracy is not only not used, but it's obviously it's pretty apparent that it was they were afraid of it. They didn't like the idea of it, the tyranny that could possibly emerge as a result. But fundamentally, Chris, are we a democracy? Just really simply put, are we?
I think we're both. I think we're a democratic republic.
We are a democratic republic.
I mean,
thank you.
We do not directly elect the president of the United States. That's about it. That's about it.
That's about it. That's it. Thank you. We do it everything else, but we just don't do it with the president. Why?
There's a reasonable argument to be made to that effect. Like, well,
I know, and
we've
discussed much of it. That was rhetorical, of course.
No, I understand, but I mean, I understand why people are largely frustrated by that, and I just again wish that people would pay more attention to what's right outside their door, because you do directly elect your city council people, you directly elect your state and federal Congress people, you directly elect your governor, and those potentially have more impact on the way that you actually live your day-to-day life. But of course, I mean, because of the prestige of the presidency, that's what people look to primarily, but trying to assign a lack of health in American democracy just by looking at the presidency is short-sighted, because really, I think over the last couple of years, particularly over the last few months, we've seen the power of the leaders that we do directly elect. I mean, you had a guy who entered the White House and who, by all accounts, when he had that first meeting with the guy that he was going to succeed in November of 2016, after he won the presidency, it sounded like Barack Obama scared the shit out of him concerning the responsibilities and the limitations that are inherent in the presidency. He thought he was elected king. And he has been proven completely wrong because of the safeguards that are put into place for checks and balances. Not that he hasn't made significant changes to the way that, let's say, federal judges are made up, or the Supreme Court of the United States. He's made really significant changes to the way that those things operate and the ideological makeup of those things. But that Muslim ban, he couldn't get that done right away. When he had majorities in both houses of Congress, right before the midterms this year, they couldn't even give him his wall. These are the kinds of things that check the president's power, and those are people that are directly elected. And of course, the elected officials themselves, they want to try and preserve American democracy as best as possible, and they deserve credit for not rolling over in every instance, although there are some cases where, they certainly did roll over for him. But the fact that he has had difficulty in trying to actually implement some of the more radical aspects of his agenda, I think is a testament to the strength of American democracy and the strength of checks and balances. And the Electoral College is something that we will have to deal with at some point, whether it's changing the way that it works or just getting rid of it altogether. Something is going to, I don't know when it will happen by any stretch of the imagination. It will have to be dealt with, though. But in the meantime, you have to participate at the elections at every level. If you were really disappointed by Hillary Clinton being chosen as the Democratic nominee, you could have helped fix that way more than you think you probably could have if you turned up for a primary to support the candidate that you did want.
And by the way, in certain states, and do your homework, guys, okay, everybody listening, here in Texas, I have to be a registered Democrat. I don't give money to the DNC. I think Democrats are incompetent hacks. I think that they are by far the lesser of two evils. I wouldn't even call them evil. I would call factions of the Trump GOP evil. I love Republicans. I have many family and friends that are. I don't like this modern day Republican Party, but I'm not
but really,
Democrat.
Rick, how many people did you hear, especially being in Texas and knowing Republicans as much as you do, how many people were actively disappointed when he clinched the nomination?
A lot, and a lot of them, sadly, have forfeited their issues with him, although everything's just gotten worse because they've gotten their judges and they got their tax cuts.
Right.
And it's unfortunate.
But if they didn't want him to be the nominee, I mean, statistically speaking, there is far less participation at the primary level. It's only the hardcore people who are turning up for primaries.
100%. And that's why, like in Texas, I have to be registered as a Republican or Democrat to participate in the primaries. Mm-hmm. There's not open primaries in every state. So bite the bullet. I mean, I don't want to be a Democrat, but I will register as a Democrat to be able to participate in the primary. That's how we're look. You elect a president. Before you elect a president, guys, you know what you do? You nominate a nominee.
Yeah.
Right? That's the first thing you do. That's the most important thing. If more people wanted Bernie to be the nominee, more people would have voted for him. It's not because Donna Brazile emailed Hillary Clinton a fucking debate question. It's because he got less votes. All right. So for the sake of time here, we've got a couple things to get to,
sure.
and so let's move on from this. All right. Real quick. I'll say real quick, whatever. But I put out on social media, right? I said because obviously we don't necessarily disagree per se, maybe on some certain points. I would like to have had a person on here that's just, no, this is the way to go, stick with the EC. But it just wasn't, that's not just how stars lined up. But I did want to take some questions. Now, quite honestly, we have covered most of the questions just by the natural course of the conversation. So, I mean, like, for instance, provide a check for the people. We got into all that and how electorals are chosen and whatever. Protecting small states. We got into all that. And that really, by the way, is the most concerning thing is small states. I'm going to read one from my friend Matthew Helm. Shout out to Matthew if he's listening. This is on my personal Facebook page. And he put just recently, 29 minutes ago, he said, I think that without the EC, the flyover states would not be represented. Now, we've covered that, but that is the biggest concern with people is that they think that New York and California are going to elect presidents. And I say, no, the math really doesn't reflect that. And the biggest thing that you and I have talked about, I think the most important thing is what we don't know is that unsung hero, right? That person that is, we don't know how many people are just don't participate because they're a liberal in Alabama, and why fucking bother? Why bother going to stand in line and even do it? I'm just going to go to a bar and have some drinks, or I'm going to go see a movie, or I'm going to go home and cook dinner for my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, right? Why bother? And I think that would just unleash, dare I say, democracy. Everybody would want to participate because they would feel and know that their voice truly matters. So, and not only that, setting all that sort of rah-rah stuff aside, I don't think the math really supports that anyway.
Well, I mean, there's also a larger problem, though, of civic education. Because if people actually knew the full ins and outs of the process, then I think they would realize exactly how much power they do have at every level as long as they participate at the right times. If you don't really know how primaries work, in getting a party nominee actually nominated for president, then when you learn that and you realize, well, okay, so I could have actually affected that potentially at a higher level if I actually got in on the ground floor. I mean, it's just like anything. If you got in on the ground floor investing in Netflix, then you're rolling in money today, right?
Right.
You have to get in on the ground floor of these contests at an early enough point that you actually have a significantly higher mathematical weight in affecting who will become the presidential nominee if you participate. And there aren't a lot of people who know the full ins and outs of the way that the system works. And I think that would be just as true in some of the quote-unquote flyover states, although I don't think really any state is necessarily a flyover state. But that's a philosophical discussion. But, I mean, if these people actually had the right information at their fingertips, and it's not always their fault. There are people who try and suppress this kind of information because they don't want people to vote.
They don't want them to
at every
vote.
level.
They don't want them to vote.
But
Absolutely.
we live now in a time where information is almost all the time in everybody's hands, at least most people. You know, if you have a smartphone, you have access to a wealth of the world's treasure of information. And find out how this stuff works. Once you find out how it works and you find out exactly how powerful you can be in affecting things when you get in on the ground floor, then at least if you go into the voting booth on a general election day and you see a candidate who's nominated that you didn't really like, you at least know that you did something. And you tried. People who just show up on a general election day, or even less frequently than that, that's the bare minimum, and democracy doesn't reward doing the bare minimum.
It doesn't. Democracy doesn't reward doing the bare minimum. Quote Chris Clow on February 21st, 2019. That's we're going to put that on a plaque. Okay, just real quick. I went over to the Left Shew Facebook page. Andrew Lyons, conservative buddy of mine. Keep it. If we didn't, there would be about 10 cities in the U.S. that would elect our president. It's not equal representation. Okay, we discussed that. Thank you, Andrew, for the question. Hopefully we covered that for you, buddy. Paul Valdez, a liberal buddy of mine down in San Antonio, Texas. Even though it cost us the last two elections, I think we keep it. Otherwise, we will see even more wealth disparity between states. Respectfully disagree with that. Not even sure what that means. But he's a smart guy, just I don't get what that means. Candidates would funnel all big projects and national spending initiatives only to those cities, states with high population density. Why attempt to help save or bolster any industry in a state with minimal density when I can spend my political capital on a state with much higher density to maximize my vote? The disparity between the haves and have-nots would only grow larger. You would effectively leave a large number of states to completely fend for themselves when it comes to fighting for federal funds. Wow, that's loaded, Paul. Let's talk about that privately, buddy. I think that you're off base on that, sir. Chris, you want to just briefly comment on that or anything? Or that's a great. That's a killer response. I think he's overthinking it.
Well, I mean, there can be merit, though, because since we don't have a direct democratic system when it comes to presidential elections, I think that there is an argument to be made that there will be heavier influence that's centered in urban areas, because it's very much the same thing that you talked about earlier, Rick, when it comes to the battleground states, is that there is so many campaign resources that are focused on those particular territories that people feel more engaged and they feel more rewarded. And if you're going to if you have just a basic popular vote, you go to where the population centers are, and that is a problem. Not something that I'm not saying it couldn't be overcome depending on the way that a candidate chooses to use their campaign resources, but it is something that is that's probably the fundamental argument that I would say has the most weight to it.
I still think it could be overruled by the majority, though. I just do. I think that if you really break down the math, and at the end of the day, I'm tired of talking about who calls the election, Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin. How about who calls the election is the American citizen, the people. The people. Period. End of story. The people. And on that note, I want to close this conversation out with a quote from Al Gore. And by the way, any last words you have, Chris, chime in after I'm done with my quote here. And I think former VP Al Gore knows a thing or two about the Electoral College. Fair to say, the man lost presidency in 2000, even though he won the popular vote. But and I talked about this on the top of the show when Chris was talking about the pros and cons, because it's not a perfect. I don't suggest it would be a perfect transition, but he said, and I don't know when this was, but it was. I should have looked into that. It's certainly recent. It's in the last 2 or 3 years. But he said that I think moving to a popular vote system is not without peril. It's not without problems. It's not a simple one. It's not a simple choice. And it's not something that's all good or all bad. It is a balancing act. But I think the balance has shifted, in my mind at least. And I think that we should go to a popular vote. And I think, this is very important, everybody, and I think it would stimulate public participation in the democratic process like nothing we have ever seen before. Yes, I agree. Chris, any last thoughts on that?
Here's my problem. And this is honestly
you say, I agree, Rick. Yay, we have fireworks and we dance to okay, I'm sorry.
But my problem with anything, and this goes back to pretty much any political issue that you could bring up, except maybe the death penalty. I'm pretty declarative on that. But most of the time...
Hold on, I gotta make a note. Podcast on death penalty, Chris, as guest. Okay, go ahead.
Most of the time, I have a lot of difficulty making simple declarative statements because these topics have such nuance to them. And you're absolutely right in saying that it wouldn't be an easy transition one way or the other. You know, there's a lot of factors. We're a big country, over 300 million people. There's a lot of logistics that can play into the pros and cons of changing something that's been such a fundamental core part of the way that we elect our head of state for our entire history. So I agree with the philosophy. I don't think yet that I've seen a way mechanically to actually make it feasibly work. And because along with the single swath of votes that you could get from just a regular popular vote, there could potentially be other protections that are in place that the Electoral College has given us that we might be taking for granted. And it might be like ripping a Band-Aid off and having a gaping wound there. We just don't know. I'm not saying I'm not open to getting rid of the Electoral College, but whomever proposes that in a serious way where it's actually a feasible thing to happen, you got to convince me.
Well, look, it would require a constitutional amendment, which is 2/3 approval from both houses of Congress. And so it's probably unlikely to happen. Not anytime soon, but I do think that the tide is turning, and I do think that we will get to a point where it becomes obsolete. I certainly hope so, and it may not be in my lifetime. Most important thing in my lifetime, I want campaign finance reform.
Yeah,
I want gun reform. I want climate change to be taken seriously. I want a female president.
By the way, climate change. In Chicago, like in January a few weeks ago, we got down to minus 25 degrees, and it hit just a couple of days after that. It was high 40s, almost 50 degrees. There was like a 90-degree difference within 48 hours.
Hey,
Do not tell me that climate change is fake. Just don't. That's
welcome to North Texas, sir.
Oh, good God.
That's Dallas weather, dude. If you don't like the weather in Dallas, just blink. Just blink.
Well, hey, anyway, man, that polar vortex made it like Hoth here. I'm not kidding.
That's 2 Star Wars references, man. I don't know if our political audience gives a shit or follows that, but maybe they do. I posted on the Facebook page today, and Michael has never commented on this. We try to. We're independent voices. There are times that we don't like a position that the other one takes, and believe me, we will mass text each other like a motherfucker, right? But Jeremy does not like me posting the Jim Carrey paintings. And he makes a really good argument of why not. But like today, Jim Carrey painted Trump as Darth Maul and said, if you support this guy, you're a Sith, basically. I had to post that one, dude. Go to the Facebook page and see. You'll see. I had to. And of course, Jeremy's like, I've got to distance myself from this. So he's chiming in on his personal handle on that. So it's just kind of funny.
That's funny.
All right. So let's wrap this up, man. We've got families to get back to and things to do. And it's 9:20 on our time. It's probably a good time to get back to bed. Give us a plug, sir. Anything you want to plug at all?
I was actually recently on a Batman on Film podcast that kind of debated the death penalty because we were talking about Batman's no-kill rule, which is something that he's had in the source material for a long time, but the movies have kind of ignored it, and we got into a pretty robust discussion about that.
I can't wait for that. I talked to Ryan and everybody listening. I'm part of Batman on Film also, and I think that would be a great. I've been wanting to plan a Left Shoe podcast about comic books. And look, let's face it, it's all rooted in politics. Oh yeah, am I wrong?
No,
it's people depressed about poverty and war and the Great Depression, and like that's where all that's the genesis of all this, right? We looked up to these heroes to get us out of the darkest chapters of American history. So there's a political podcast to be had for this, but I like that particular topic because Batman's my favorite fictional character of all time. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think that it ties into a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of gun control and how our mentality should be about guns in general.
Well, another thing too, Rick, and another thing that I want to plug, because I also have a podcast called Discovery Debrief, which talks about new episodes of Star Trek Discovery as they come out. Mm-hmm. I know you're not a big Star Trek guy, but I think you could be because of its very proud progressive lineage. And
I have no doubt. I just don't have time.
Well, hey, you ever need a guide, you let me know. Because,
absolutely.
I mean, Star Trek it was home of the very first interracial kiss on television ever. It has roots in a philosophy that says that humanity's best days are ahead of us, not behind us. Mm-hmm. And it advocates for an ideology that represents the power and triumph of equality. One of the core tenets of the franchise is IDIC. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Diversity is a thing to be celebrated, and it always has been, and usually the worst villains in the entire Star Trek franchise are people that act, or at least organizations or beings or entities that actively quash any kind of diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm pretty sure you'd be very into it.
So basically, what you're saying is that the Last Jedi hating, social justice warrior, feminist agenda assholes really hate the late '60s Star Trek.
Oh, Star Trek at any point. Oh, are you kidding? That's even someone I know who's like the most dyed-in-the-wool Last Jedi hater acknowledges that that's always been a part of Star Trek. So
I think I know who you're talking about. I want to ask you to say his name. Is it someone that has a YouTube channel?
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah, I know who he is. All right, where can we find you on Twitter, buddy?
At Chris Clow, ChrisClow.
All right, man. Thank you so much, Chris. This was a great conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In addition to our podcast, we ask that you please like us on Facebook, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe there, and follow us on Twitter at Left Shoe Politic, no S because of those damn character limitations. If you care to follow us individually on Twitter, follow me, Rick, at ShewRick, ShewRick, at yahoo.com. That's funny. I was giving my email address. At ShewRick. That's my Twitter handle. Yes, I still have a Yahoo account because I'm stuck in the 90s. Follow Michael Malloy at Goodie, Goodie Malloy, and follow Jeremy at Fit with Jeremy. And on that note, Jeremy and Groklee, he wanted me to say that he's been real busy with family and business obligations, but he will return to the airwaves soon with his own Left Shoe show, and with new content and a format focusing on campaign finance reform. And Michael Malloy actually was trying to text me earlier with a plug for this episode. He was getting on a plane and it never transmitted. I didn't get it. So what's up, Michael Malloy? Hope you're safe in the air and you land and host another show soon. Those guys are awesome. This site would be shit without them. So I just want to say that. And on behalf of myself, Michael, and Jeremy, we thank you all for your support. And now it's time for announcer Rachel to take us out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of our Left Shoe Politics podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Left Shoe Politics. Follow the Facebook page at facebook.com/Left Shoe Politics and the LSP website, leftshoepolitics.com. Search for our channel on YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play.